and looking at like long term, it's not just about replacing notes on phone calls. Like I think that's can be helpful, but like long term, how can that benefit the industry with better training, better data, being able to actually really approach things like diversity and bias within interviewing.
Welcome to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am your host, Trent Cotton. In this podcast, we will answer one big question. Is your HR organization future-proof? My guests are at the top of their field, and they'll be answering all of the questions that keep you up at night, including the future of work, how AI is going to impact our workforce, human capital, and of course, AI in HR. So whether you are an HR professional or a business leader, you're going to want to follow along and take a lot of notes. So with that, let's get into this episode and transform you into a human capitalist. Hey there, welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am your host, Trent Cotton, and today I have got the man, the legend, Mr. Joel. If you don't know him and you have spent any time in recruiting, I'm going to wonder where you've been because he is all over the place and in a good way. So Joel, thanks for joining.
Yeah, great to be here. Really excited to chat today, and I'm probably going to pick your brain a lot as well because I know we're going to be talking about some future trends in recruitment, so I'm excited about it.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know you, why don't you give us a rundown?
Yeah, so my name is Joel Lalgee. I've been in recruiting since 2015, so this year it will be a decade. So I don't have to say nearly a decade anymore. I can actually say a decade. Spent most of my time working with recruitment agencies, worked with a number of RPOs, and then most recently set up my own recruitment agency focused on the construction space. And then, like you said, create a lot of content, primarily started on LinkedIn. But now I actually have more followers on TikTok, although TikTok's probably going to get banned in 2 weeks.
Yeah, what are you going to do with the ban?
Yeah, you know what? That's a whole different thing, but I'm a little bit sad about it. I don't know whether how that's going to impact things for my business. It's definitely going to impact it. But luckily, I started creating content on Instagram and Facebook, and those platforms have grown pretty quick as well. So,
okay.
So content creator, recruiter, and then I spend some time as well coaching and training recruitment teams on how to attack social media, how to stay consistent, how to create a system to attract candidates, leads if you're on the agency side. And so that is me in a nutshell.
Well, and I've got a special thank you to you because I think it was October. You hit me up and said, "Hey, we need to talk," and immediately where my brain goes when someone goes, "We need to talk," I'm like, "All right, I've pissed them off somehow." And I'm like, "How in the world did I piss off Joel?" I was thinking maybe I commented on his kind of, but anyway, I do appreciate it. You took the time and just kind of pushed me a little bit, pushed me a lot. It was actually the tip for me to just say, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot and see where it goes. So not only is he a fantastic influencer, thought leader, he is just a fantastic guy. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm passionate about people, recruit people in our recruitment space that are genuine humans and have actual thoughts to bring to the space, like actually getting their voices out there. And I know you talk about it a lot. Just on LinkedIn, like I'm seeing this evolution of the content not necessarily being that high value, people chasing the likes and the views, which I get, and some of my content is like that. But from like a thought leader perspective and just being somebody that adds value, I'm all about people who have things to say and have points of views, getting their voice out there. And so I'm glad that was a helpful thing.
It was. I'm eternally grateful. So let's talk about human capital. So just if this is the first time listening, I really think that HR is ripe for change. I think AI is really speeding it along. So I don't like human resources. It's kind of old school mindset processes. I want to talk more about human capital, where we're actually dealing with the highest expense and the highest asset that produces revenue in the organization, which is its people. So that's whenever I say human capital, that's kind of what I'm talking about. Where do you see it going in the next 1 to 5 years?
I think we've kind of seen at least the initial part of this transition over the last 18 months. I think we're going to see a lot more fractional, a lot more, instead of trading, time for money like a traditional 9 to 5. I think we're just going to continue to see freelancers and this fractional talent being used, and I think people really understanding what are the skills that I bring to the table versus just this kind of transactional 9 to 5 relationship that we've known. And so I know I've seen it with a lot of people who I deal with who maybe were recruiters working internally at companies, whether that's they're recruiting, supervisor or manager, all the way up to like talent leaders and heads of talent, finding themselves getting laid off and going, what do I do? And then having to make that decision. Do I start my own business? How do I start my own business? I think a lot of people have settled into this idea of, fractional and being able to like lead a department. And so being able to do that, you have to know what are your skills and how are you going to add value to an organization. Some people that's, could be recruitment marketing, could be, actually filling positions. So you're more of an agency, could be consulting. Then on the HR side could be, being like a fractional chief people officer. So I think we're going to see that at all levels, whether you're in sales, marketing, HR, obviously tech. And I think we're going to continue to see this shift because from a company perspective, like you said, people bring your highest ROI and they bring the most to a company, but they're also the biggest expense as well.
Yep.
And so for companies being able to manage that expense and really be able to balance, hey, we don't need to hire you for 40 hours. Maybe you're doing 10 hours of work, but with that 10 hours of work, we're getting the same ROI that we would get out of someone, working 40 hours. So that means we're actually able to pay you more per hour, get more out of you. But then from the perspective of the, the employee, it means they're able to obviously take on more clients and get paid more money too. So it's kind of striking that balance.
Yeah, and I think with agentic AI, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for people to still do quality work, but they'll be managing AI agents that will be actually doing some of the mundane stuff. And, whenever you look at that lens, to me, HR, if I were a CEO, HR would be the first one that I would unleash agents on because there's so much. I mean, you've been in organizations and it's like, move this paper from this step to this step to this step. There's an AI agent out there that can do it for a fraction of the time and probably, in my case, do it a lot more efficiently, right? You don't want me doing
it's the communication, right? It's like that's whether you look at recruiting, HR, customer service. There's like the two pieces, like the communication and then how quickly that communication can happen. And then obviously like what is actually being communicated, and AI makes that so much more efficient. So if you want to do onboarding, traditionally you're having to reach out to this whole thing. Imagine you get your AI onboarder that just onboards you seamlessly to the company. Hey, do you have your laptop? Okay, I don't know. Do I? Yep, here it is. Here's the tracking for it. Great. Am I signed into all the systems? Yep, here are you logging. And just being able to do that, and instead of having somebody do that, via email or phone or trying to link up and sync up, that's just one example. And then you think about playbooks, you think about just all of these different things. And I think the more we think about it, initially people are really like, oh, I don't like that because it sounds like it's going to replace a human. But then when you break it down, it's like, oh, actually, that's more efficient. And guess what? You still need the human to manage and make sure people aren't falling through the cracks. And you're always going to get those people who are like, I don't want to deal with this. I want to deal with the human. So you still have to have some, human that's accessible that you can communicate through that process. But like you said, it's more like management of these agents, and then probably top line just managing and making sure everything's, working well and people don't have those random problems. Because you're always going to get those people who are like, yeah, it's 0, 0, 0. I want to talk to a human. But we're going to see that evolution where people just want things on their own time in their own way as well.
Well, and it's funny. It was back in 2015, 2016. I was using this AI assistant, Amy, I think, Amy.ai. But, if I was going to schedule something with you, and this was before Calendly and all of that, if I was going to schedule something with you, I would CC and say, hey, Amy, my assistant's going to coordinate a time. And so then she would go back and forth and email, with you and get something set up. And if you asked a question that was not in its kind of learning, it would send it back to me and go, hey, I don't know how to respond to this question. So funny story. I got one of those emails where the AI sent me something and it said, hey, I don't really understand how to respond to this email. Can you take a look and advise? It's like, yeah, cool. So this was with one of the executives for the firm that I was working for. And the email hacked me up because it said, hey, Amy, I know that you work for Trent, but you are incredibly efficient. You're always on top of things. You have perfect grammar. If you ever really want to get a raise or something, like, he was basically trying to recruit Amy thinking that she was a real person. And so I called him. I said, hey, Steve, my admin told me that you're trying to recruit her. He goes, look, man, look. I said, you do know that that's an AI. He goes, what do you mean? I said, artificial intelligence. And he goes, shut the hell. No way. So, I mean, even back then there was just, and that saved me so much time not going back and forth. I just show up on the calendar. So, what are some of the AI trends that you're watching?
Yeah, I mean, the big one this year is for sure the AI agents and how and what they're replacing, particularly in recruitment. That's really the lens of which I'm looking at things through. So, I know last year I saw a lot around like interview intelligence, so like note takers and summarizing and looking at like long term. It's not just about replacing notes on phone calls. Like I think that's can be helpful, but like long term, how can that benefit the industry with better training, better data, being able to actually really approach things like diversity and bias within interviewing from a universal point of view and going, okay, look, we had 2,000 interviews and this is how much this interviewer spoke compared to this interviewer. This is how we viewed what the candidate said, and like just being able to really understand what's going on. This year, I'm really excited about, like you said, like what are the use cases, and those use cases getting more and more. I know individually, I've been hit up by so many companies that are looking to take away the AI phone screen with a recruiter. And like, how does that go into play? And that's obviously just like an AI agent that's doing that work. So I'm always looking at like what are the new use cases that are going to come up, and I think that's what I'm most excited about for this next year. And then how are companies like really looking at integrating this to be able to save time and be more efficient? I think the big area for me that a lot of people, I don't think overlook, but a lot of people haven't necessarily been as focused on, but I think there's a ton of room for just innovation is candidate experience. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
why this matters is because from somebody who creates a lot of content for job seekers, the biggest complaint is ghosting and just communication and just bad experience as a candidate. And so I'm really excited about how some of these AI agent tools are going to be able to actually help with that, which will elevate the work that we do as recruiters and then allow us to really work on that relationship between the hiring manager and the candidates they have, and just allow us to really just elevate candidates' experience. And I know it's something which a lot of people gripe about and talk about, but I think we're going to start to see these AI agents really helping with that and just helping like basically multiply what we do as recruiters. So that's what I'm looking at the most.
And it's funny. I was speaking at a conference in the fall of 2024, and of course AI and HR, but this was I think this was the recruiting track that I was sitting on a panel. So I just asked the room. I said, "Hey, raise your hand if you think that AI could never replace recruiters." And everybody in there had their hand up. I said, so keep your hand up if you think that a candidate would rather wait on a human to give them an update, if they'll even get an update, or would they rather deal with an AI? And every hand went down. I said, and that's the problem. That's what you've
Exactly.
got to prepare for. And, it's actually kind of a perfect segue because I wanted to talk to you about the workforce. You and I do share a passion. I get heartbroken and pissed off at the same time whenever I see what candidates have to go through from working with some of our colleagues in the industry. Do you think that it's going to change over the next year or two and swing back to being a candidate-driven market?
Oh man, I think yes, but like just nowhere near to the degree that it was in. I think yes, but like nowhere near to the degree as it was in 2021. So I think 2021 was so extreme when it came to just basically a candidate market where we're seeing, for the first time really that I've ever experienced, candidates calling the shots and companies having to move fast, for example. So like I was recruiting recruiters of all people, and I was talking to recruiters that would have 5, 6, even 7 offers. It was like companies were fighting over recruiters like crazy, and you talk to candidates and they say, "Is this job remote?" And if it wasn't remote, they would hang up on
You're
you.
out.
You're out automatically. And it was like, and then
Yeah.
companies like, yeah, craziest story I had. I had a startup that I was working with that was based in Europe, and they were looking for a recruitment leader for the U.S. operations as they grew in the U.S. So it was a really cool opportunity. But because they were in Europe, they were taking a little bit longer with the interview. And I was working with someone. Must have been like a 2-month process, but they were just taking their time, but they were just making sure like the person was going to be a good fit because they were the first hire in the U.S. and they were basically going to hire the rest of the U.S. workforce. So it was a
Through that
big role
person.
for
Oh,
them.
wow. Yeah.
And I got a candidate right to the final round, and they're kind of like an offer negotiation, and then suddenly a big tech company came along. They'll remain nameless as the other company will, but they literally made a move in like less than a week, and they ran the candidate through 3 rounds and just moved crazy fast. And that's what we were seeing in 2021. It was just like I'd never seen companies move that fast. So I don't think we're going to get to there. But I do think that as more and more companies have optimism about the future, they are going to start to hire more. They are going to start to look to bring more people on the team. I think if I'm a candidate, what I'm focused on is really studying like where are the areas and what are the tools out there, the AI tools that are out there, and what are the areas of like whatever field you're in, what are they impacting the most, and getting ahead of that curve. Because I think that's going to be a skill set that companies are going to look for more and more is like, what's your knowledge of AI? Do you know about tools? How can you work more efficiently? So yes, I do think that it's gonna start to shift again, but I also think it's it's just gonna take a while, and it's not gonna be like as extreme as it was from going from 21 to 2022. That shift from candidate market to employer market happened really quickly. It's not going to happen as quickly as that. It's going to be more of a slow burn. That's what I'm thinking.
Makes sense. And there was, when the whole Great Resignation came out, the economist that started all of that, I think he was based in Austin. The poll that he did that kind of triggered this whole idea, this concept, was that I want to say it was like in the low 40s. The percentage of people that he polled that said, yeah, I'm probably going to make a move in the next 6 to 12 months. So that's where he came up with the term Great Resignation. There's been another poll since then, and we are now looking north of 55% of the workforce that was polled saying, yes, if the market picks up, I will make a move. And so, they're talking about the Great Resignation 2.0. And do you think that candidates are just, or people are just kind of keeping their job, one, because of the market, and two, because of the economy?
Yeah, I mean, they're calling it like the great stay, right? And so it's, I think if you've been trying to recruit people, number one, again, looking back at 2021, the question was like, is it remote and how much does it pay? Now there's a lot more focus on, is the company stable? How long have they been around for? Like, people are much more aware that, hey, if I make a move, I might be new in an organization. If I'm new in an organization, I'm more prone to get laid off. At least that's the idea, right? It's like last in, first out type methodology, which isn't always true, but that's I think the perception that people have. And so, I'm a content creator that talks a lot about how brutal the job market is. I think I've talked to people recently that I met with one-on-one that says, yeah, I'm thinking about looking for something new, but I've thrown out 100 applications over the last month and I haven't heard anything back. So then they're like, all right, well, I'll hold on to my job. And so I do think a lot more people are staying in jobs that they're not necessarily excited about. Also, I think we just live in a culture of change. And so we're like people that like change. We like new environments. And we also want growth. And there's an idea of like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, if I'm not getting growth in my current position, I got to look somewhere else. And then we also know that, if you stay at a company for a long time, you might not get the same raises that you would if you were looking at making a move to another company. So like job hopping, as much as everybody says that, they don't want a job hopper, we almost incentivize job hopping. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
think for a lot of people in this market, they're like, yeah, the job market seems really hard. I'll stay in my job. But you and I and anyone in recruiting knows as soon as like more and more companies start hiring, you start to see more movement. And it is kind of like a domino effect, right? Because it's almost like musical chair. It's like a giant game of musical chairs almost.
It really is.
And it can happen really, really quickly. And that's why I'm also optimistic around remote work, because right now we're seeing a return to office with a lot of large companies. But you could argue that that's just because they're either still looking to lay people off, and returning people to the office is kind of an easy way to do that. And it just isn't the same competition that there was for talent like there was in 2021. And I would also argue that that's the whole reason that remote work even stayed around as long as it did after the pandemic, because when you can hire remotely, you can then hire anywhere in the US or even internationally, which just means your talent pool is way bigger. It makes recruiting easier. And anyone who was in recruiting in 2021 knows that like it was hard to recruit people because there were so many offers going on. So it's like, to me, it's kind of like a weird cycle that you kind of see repeating.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's like I see a lot of people who comment on these things saying, oh, remote work is dead. And then, I'll use that in some of my clickbait titles, but they'll say remote work is dead. But I'm also saying, like, just zoom out and look what happened 4 years ago. It wasn't really that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Something could easily start to happen again. And then, like you said, with the amount of people that we talk to who are like, yeah, I'm not happy at my job. I want more growth. There just isn't those opportunities out there. Well, as soon as those opportunities are out there and recruiters start reaching out, I think it's going to be pretty easy to pull people away from those opportunities or from their current places of work.
Yeah, I think, I was actually advising our leadership team this morning. Look, the salaries and everything that we have now, because we're kind of doing an adjustment of what the salary bands and our rates are going to be. And, I said, I really think that we're not married to this until the end of the year. I really think that by June, we should have a line of sight on, is it going to be gang or bust? And we're going to have to make a decision at that point as to what our strategy is going to be going forward. So I feel better about 2025 than I did going into 2024. I knew it was going to be brutal. I didn't know how brutal it was going to be, but for all the recruiters or HR generalists or whoever that is listening that deals with candidates, please, please, please remember, the employee experience starts in the recruiting process. You botch that, there is no coming back from it. I don't care how long they stay. They will always remember how you treated them on the front end. So, let's talk about personal branding, because you are the black ninja, black belt of personal branding. I've talked to a couple of HR professionals over the last couple of months that have really been inspired by maybe someone that they're following, and they want to do more, and they're kind of tiptoeing around it. If someone's wanting to up their game, what's your advice to them on the personal branding side?
Yeah, I think number one, really figuring out who is your audience and who you want to speak to is crucial. And it's not really talked about enough, because I think it's something I overlooked when I started creating content, because I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just thinking, hey, how do I write something, or how do I think in my mind, I was like, how do I get creative? Like that was kind of what drew me into it. But I think if I was going back, I'd go like, who do I want to reach? Like who's that group of people? Is it executives? Is it entry level people? Is it professional women? Is it people of color? Like whoever it is that you're trying to reach, really nailing that down and understanding that first before you even start creating. Second thing is looking at people who have those audiences and who are creating the type of content that you resonate with, which there's going to be those people out there. Looking at, can I shortlist 5 or 10 creators, like you just said, that I can look at and just start to like understand why is it that their content is resonating and what is it that they're doing really, really well. So first step, knowing who your audience is. Second step, who's already reaching those audiences and what are they doing well. And then the third step is starting to gather and put together a strategy that's not going to burn you out. And what I mean by that is, I talk to a lot of people that are just like, they're doing it just like each and every day. They're like waking up and they're coming up with the idea and like kind of just like faking it until they make it idea with content.
Right.
And what that will do is that will just lead you to just complete burnout. So you got to have some sort of strategy and system that almost like growing to me is like secondary. It's like having something that you can do without burning out. Because in the 5 years that I've been creating content, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people, they go consistent. They might even go for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And then suddenly they hit this like wall and they're just done because they just cannot keep doing it. And I think sometimes that can happen if you just don't have like a really clear system that's just something that you can stick to and be consistent with. So understand your audience, find people who are already doing a good job so you can understand what's making them good and kind of take things from them and, emulate them, for lack of a better word, imitate, whatever you want to call it. And then that third is just getting a system for yourself that really, really works. And then just the last piece is just having it in your mind. Like a lot of times people are like, well, how can you stay so consistent? It's because like I'm living in like 10 years from now. That's all I ever think about.
Right.
It's like, what is it going to be like in a decade? So I think there's an idea that people have, like once you get to 100,000 followers or 200,000 followers or whatever that number is, like somehow you're never going to have to create content again. That is an illusion. It's like content is just start to embody it or start to put it in like your work as just something that you do. So for me, it's just business development. Some people cold call, some people do cold emails, some people send DMs. For me, I just create content. And I do a little bit of the outbound as well. But biggest part of my business development is just getting my name out there consistently. And once I made that shift, that's how I'm able to stay consistent with it. And that's how I've been able to stay consistent for, a decent amount of time now. It's been like 5 years, which I would say is halfway to that decade. But I'm still creating content like it's my first day, like I'm doing it. Like I'm not taking the foot off the gas. I'm like, if anything, I'm putting the foot on the gas and doing it even more because I got the momentum with it. So that's what my encouragement would be. And then I think the last piece is just to be realistic with it and like, like maybe you get to 100,000 followers, amazing. If that's, going to grow your business. But also like, you don't need to get to that point. I think focusing on kind of like what we talked at the beginning on, like, what's your message? What's the value that you're bringing? And how can I do that? And yes, like looking at your content and going, how could I make it better? But also just understanding like it is a long game. And again, I've seen a lot of people blow up really quickly and get 100,000 followers, million followers. And then they just burn out and they fizzle away because their heart wasn't really in it and they didn't really have the vision for it. So getting that aligned, it's huge and it's important. And I will say now it is more competitive than it's ever been. A lot more people want to be content creators. A lot more people want to make more money from it. And so that means that you might not see the results that maybe people saw 3 or 4 years ago, but that's okay. It's like you can still make an impact. You can still get your name out there. You could still build a brand. You can still connect with people. And a lot of that I would even argue is done offline anyway. And it's done through like meeting people and building real relationships. Like we have a real relationship. We've talked offline.
Right.
We've met in
Mm-hmm.
person.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you just saw one of my posts and were like, hey, Joel, can you jump on a podcast? Like we have a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that and not losing sight of that is also really, really important. And it's something I have to remind myself of a lot as well.
Well, and I think, you and I have very similar passions whenever it comes to content around subjects like the candidate experience, about, kind of excellence, not just in recruiting, but throughout the people function. But how you go about doing it and how I go about doing it are completely different, but we're saying the same thing, So I think the other piece of that is just, you've got to find your voice, as corny as it sounds. You've got to find your voice. I had a reader reach out to me, I think it was right before Christmas, and they'd go, hey, I'm just checking on you. Are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm burnt out, but like, where's this coming from? They said, well, you haven't cursed a lot in any of your posts lately. I just wanted to see if you're okay. And I'm like, okay, thank you.
That's
So
amazing.
apparently a sailor mouth is part of my brand, but that's okay. It took a while for me to feel comfortable enough just to kind of be myself. I mean, if you know me personally, you know that my favorite word is the F-bomb.
Yeah.
And some of the things I've said on stage probably should never be said on stage, but that's something that I have learned to be comfortable with. If you are not comfortable having that type of a brand, don't. If you want to be the educator, then go all in on it. Just be yourself. Because there's I'm not going to name them, but there's a couple of people that I'll see your post and then I'll see their post later that day, and I'm like, they just took what Joel said and ran it through AI and said, rephrase this. And what's bad is that I read it and I still hear you. I don't hear them, because you've got a very distinctive flavor about how you do things.
Well, look, and two, it's like, the point of view is huge. And I've talked about this. I talk about this a lot with like people when they're asking for advice, and having a point of view, which is basically like a thought or like an opinion on something essentially. So like remote work, for example, like I'm very opinionated when it comes to remote work. My idea is if you can get your job done from anywhere and still get results, like I feel like that this should be something you're allowed to do. And and whether you want to get those results in an office with other people, great. If you want to do that in your basement, in the corner, as long as you're getting the results, I personally don't care. That's my personal opinion. And so what that is a point of view.
And I don't care if it takes you 8 hours or if it takes you 4 hours. Just get the work done. I'll pay you the same, right?
Exactly. And like another point of view, interviewing. I don't think that you should really have any more than 3 interviews. And I would argue if you have 3 rounds of interviews, and I think if you have any more than that, like you kind of get lost and you're probably asking the same questions over and over. That is another point of view. So what I do and what I try and encourage people to do is like have a point of view. And it's okay if someone else disagrees with you. Like that, it's actually okay. What I've noticed though is we live in a culture where people are really afraid of other people disagreeing with them and not wanting to go along with their point of view. And then it becomes this like us versus you thing instead of just understanding like, yes, that person has a different point of view than you. What should happen is you should have a conversation. Now, I will say like trolls don't know how to handle that, right? Because people just get negative, and I see it a lot on Facebook. But also like there is just this fear that like people have where they don't want to put out their opinion because they're afraid of what other people are going to say. Now, if you can get over that and actually put out your opinion, then you stand out on social media. And I think this is what we've seen like on TikTok. And like I had the feedback I had from somebody recently, they were like, yeah, Joel sounds really sarcastic. Like he's just sounds sarcastic in his videos. And I was like, well, is it really sarcasm you're hearing? Or is it just like, I just have confidence in my point of view? And that's what's developed. But that took time. It took consistency. And it really just took like, at the end of the day, still I don't care what people think. Like I actually really do care a lot about what people think. But I don't let that caring what other people think impact like what I'm going to say about whatever topics I'm talking about. So I think it's finding that voice and finding the things that you're comfortable talking about. Now, if you go through my content, I don't talk about like every area of HR. I don't talk about every single topic out there, but the topics I do talk about, I'm just clear with what my point of view is, and I articulate that. So like figuring that out is a thing too, but that takes time, and it starts with starting to say things, and it's like that didn't happen overnight. Like the evolution of that has taken years to kind of figure out, and I think it's uncomfortable. It was kind of an uncomfortable process, and when I look back at some of my old content, it is cringe-worthy, and it is like, I look back, I'm like, what was I doing? Why did people let me even do this? But I'm also grateful that they did let me do it, and they gave me freedom to kind of figure that out, because now I can articulate things a little bit more clearly and better, which produces more reactions and obviously gets more conversation started. But it's a process, and I think that it's hard. And like, again, video, which I'm really bullish on, video is hard to do. Comparative for me, public speaking, like I'm not really that good at public speaking, but I could be good at public speaking if I worked hard at public speaking and put myself out there and got better at it. Instead, I went, I'm not necessarily great at public speaking. I'm okay with that. It's not something I'm working on. But video, that's something that I'm working on and getting better at. It's a similar idea as that. So like approaching content in that same way you would anything else you're not good at, like being honest with yourself and just going, hey, I'm going to get better at this. I'm going to try and get more engaging. Yeah, I don't know.
No, that makes sense. And it's funny because I am the opposite. I get asked a lot, do you ever get nervous before you go on stage? And the answer is no. And I'm being honest. I'm not being cocky, not being confident. I get more nervous whenever I come off the stage, because then I start thinking, oh shit, I said that. Oh crap. And I can't take it back. It's out there, and most of the time it's recorded. But, for the video side, my husband usually knows whenever I am doing like standalone content, like this kind of stuff. Having a conversation is very easy for me. I'll forget the camera's on. I'm talking to my friend Joel, but if I'm actually trying to do something like where I'm teaching, how to use Gemini or something like that, he knows whenever I'm recording, because I am dropping the F-bomb like 6 or 7 times, like, damn it, because I'll get inside of my head, and then I'm thinking, if I'm watching this, like, who's that nerd?
Yeah.
So it is a battle, even for people who have been doing this for a while. And if you want to stand out in social media, please understand that you will become a target. You're going to have thick skin.
You gotta go to my right now. Facebook is blowing up for me, which is such a weird channel to blow up, but it's blowing up. And I think it's because I just had things linked up wrong, but now I got things linked up right. I went from like 0 to 5,000 followers on there. 0 to 4,000 followers in a month. All right. So we're doing like millions of views on that platform. And man, people are, it's just such like an odd world, because people just are like, I thought like TikTok was kind of brutal. Snapchat's pretty brutal, but it's just something about Facebook, which like, and I haven't really been a lot on Facebook, so I guess I haven't really seen it, and I haven't interacted on the platform, but man, people are mean. So if you ever want to feel good about yourself, just go look up the Realest Recruiter on Facebook and just go read through the comment. People are using words which like I thought were retired and people don't use anymore, but they're using them. But again, it's like that luckily that doesn't happen right away unless you just happen to go viral for whatever reason. I think if you're just looking at it on LinkedIn, for example, which is where a lot of people do start to create content, at least in my world, LinkedIn is fairly safe because people's employers are linked to it. So you don't tend to get too crazy comments. But I think like you just have to get in that discipline of like not reading the comments and like just choosing not to engage with people and just not taking it personally. Because the other thing I've noticed is I've interacted with people in real life that I've blocked or they blocked me. And it's always way different. Like it's not like people are walking around with a sensibar in their face. It's like they're human. You meet with them, you find, oh, they got kids, they're married, they got a life, they're a person, they're a human. And I think it's important that like we don't forget that as well. And if you are going to create content, like the worst thing you can do is go through your comments, because you will start. It's really hard not to take those things personally. It is really hard.
It is. I had a friend that called, he saw one of the posts and saw a couple of the trolls that said stuff, and he's like, that guy just will not leave you alone. He goes, does that keep you up at night? I said, no, he's still a fan. He's still looking at my content. I said, it's all in how you look at it. I mean, if anything, he's expanding my reach to his network by commenting on it. And he had a pretty large following. And I think in HR, because, another passion is employer branding. I think many companies are missing the opportunity to really hand the mic over to their employees and let the employees tell the employer branding story through video, through content, all of that. Are you seeing that change, or are we still kind of stuck in the 2010s?
No, I just read an article about that, actually, that was going to be more of like more something that we see, because I think we have seen an evolution, particularly last year, around like B2B influencer marketing. So obviously the consumer influencer marketing, it's been a thing forever, right? Everyone knows that. Influencers making money on Instagram. We started to see more of a shift of that happening on LinkedIn, even as a platform. Like, people are getting paid to post about products. So I do think like that will be more of an evolution, where I think companies will realize, like, hey, for employees, like encouraging them to create content, maybe giving them the tools to be able to create content. I know there's a couple of video platforms out there that kind of help with that employee generated content.
It helps you curate it too.
Yeah, and there's platforms out there. I think that the challenge is just going to be, as much as we, even as me, like I train people. One thing I've realized is there's always just going to be a certain percentage of people that like feel comfortable with the content. So even if you train them and you give them all the tools, you will always just have people that don't want to put themselves out there. And in some ways, that's like a okay thing. And I think we need to like understand that there's some employees that they don't want to create content. They never will. And that's okay. But there are going to be people who consume it, and that's fine. But it's understanding, like, how do I identify like the ambassadors within the organization that want to create, and like, how do I help them as much as possible, and how do I incentivize and celebrate them and like help them do it in a good way. And then I think the big challenge for all executives is just understanding that like it's okay if an employee says something that like you're not comfortable with, because the reality is like you're hiring humans, and if you think that every employee that you have thinks the exact same way you do about everything, like this is just a downward spiral of weird corporate culture. And I think like I talk about this a lot, like I think one of the interesting thing that we've seen with like just corporate culture in general is this idea of like bringing your authentic self to work. But the reality is that's not what companies really want. It's like culture fit, even, which is like, as much as people try to get away from it, a culture fit is somebody that like says the things that you agree with, and like is just a person you agree with. And I think this is something which like needs to kind of like evolve within employer branding. Is like, if you hire someone, it's okay if they say something that's out of your brand, and it's like, and again, there's like levels with this, and I think, there's obviously going to be a lot of complications with this, but I think the companies that like understand that and go, hey, we hired you, we really like you, you're doing a great job, we're going to let you create content because it does help the brand, and we're just going to trust you with it. But I think that for a lot of leaders, that's a really difficult place, and it's probably the thing that keeps huge companies up at night. And I get why, right? Because if one employee says something, suddenly people associate that with the whole brand, and then you lose a ton of money in the stock. But the opportunity for smaller companies is massive. So it's
huge.
It's like there's a fine balance with that stuff. I don't think anybody's figured it out. But my best advice is like, to employers in particular, is to like lean in and kind of celebrate your people, and just understand that like hey, if somebody makes a mistake, it's gonna happen. But like, it's like, well, you're gonna have the fear mentality or you're gonna have the abundance mentality. And I think having the abundance mentality is probably a better way to go. And the reality is, it's like there's probably tons of executives at your company anyway that are doing crazy stuff that if they got caught up in it would ruin your brand anyway. So
Oh, totally. Yeah.
people
And
are
as an
people.
HR, yeah, as an HR person, there are things I do not want to know what executives do in
Exactly.
free time.
But
Nor do I
that's
want them to know what I do in mine, you
this
know?
is what, like, I just realized this, like, it's just so funny, like the corporate culture, what it's become. And I think it started off with like this idea of like, pursuing your passion and doing the things that you love. And like, I can kind of get behind that, but it's like, you have this other dichotomy where it's like companies, especially large companies, they exist to create shareholder wealth. Like that is literally the number one reason they exist. So, but then it's like, it goes down to the employees, and then suddenly it's like employees have to have like a deeper reason for everything that they do. But it's like that just doesn't shake out, right? And so I
Yeah.
think one of the things we talked about earlier with like this fractional work, I think the reason we're going to see even more of that is because more and more people are going to go, hey, actually, I'm taking myself out of this corporate structure, and I
hmm
understand the skills and the value I bring, and I'm going to commoditize that and use that to create my own business. And I think that's why we're going to even see more of a rise to that. Um, anyway, kind of going on a tangent,
And
but you get what I'm
well,
saying.
no, and I think too, there's going to be an increase in the gig workforce of bringing people in to work on special projects, and then they go out, but they're in charge of kind of their own destiny. And it's funny because in 2020 I mean, everybody was forced. Everybody was trying to do a gig. Um, but I think that a lot of people really like that. So it's going to be really interesting in 2025 just to see how the workforce changes. And, I think this time last year about my knowledge and use of AI versus a year later, and it's unrecognizable. The amount of times and things that I do that are all AI or automated. So that way I can focus on the things that I want
What's
to, which is
what's
the
your
people.
most like? What are you most excited about? Like from like a use case standpoint, or like what have you seen that you're like, oh man, this is really exciting?
All right. So I took some time off, and I'm a nerd. I've said that several times on the podcast. I actually relax by learning something new, even whenever it's frustrating. I'm not a technical person. I'm not a coder, developer, nothing like that. But there's this cool system out there, make.com. And what it does is think of it as like a Swiss Army knife. It's got all these different tools that connect to all these different tools. And so, I just kind of played around with it. So something as simple as I've got a spreadsheet that's got a topic, maybe a link, and another column. I can actually get Make to go into that Google Sheet, run it through ChatGPT, and I've got, let's just say, columns A, B, and C that I want filled out by ChatGPT. I write the prompt, Make runs it through there, and then updates the worksheet. And it
Amazing.
does it within I can have it run every 15 minutes. I can have it run instantaneously. So what I am most excited about, I don't know if it'll happen in 2025, but having agents that do some of the stuff that is just not valuable to the organization at someone at my cost. Um, and then also too, I want more agents on the front end, on the recruiting process. And I want recruiters to get back to actually picking up the phone and talking to a candidate. If you were to look at your resume and my resume, how it is now, people would, go, oh, well, they're in this pigeonhole. But there's so much more whenever you're actually able to sit down and talk to someone and say, walk me through this. Well, hang on. Did you do this here? Okay, well, that's great. That's actually something that I'm looking for. It's not on your resume. So I'm hoping that we swing back to being more people-centric from beginning to even whenever we have to separate someone's employment. So are you
Love
ready
that.
for rapid fire?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. What's a book that changed your perspective on business or HR?
I'd say business would be Atomic Habits.
Favorite podcast or series?
Ah, man.
I'm a little scared about this one because
Yeah, I'd say like the podcast I used to listen to a lot, and one that really inspired was a guy called Mark Metry. I don't know if you know, if you
no, I've
listen to
never heard of
him,
it.
but it was like Humans 2.0 was the name of the podcast, and
What was it about?
he would just interview like all these um like self-help gurus and like just kind of like it was kind of like my class. It was the thing that got me to create content. So I would just listen to
Okay.
this podcast all the time. And outside of that, I don't know whether I have like a regular podcast I listen to. I
Mhm.
basically anything that I'm looking to learn about is just suggested by YouTube, and then I'll just listen to like if there's like somebody speaking on it. So
Yeah.
another one that I guess the one that I would regularly listen to, which I'm not necessarily like a fan of the creator themselves necessarily, or even the content they
Hmm.
put out. Alex Hormozy's podcast, where what's it called, like The Game or something. I
Okay.
will listen to that because I do think he has like just a gift of just making things really simple,
Hmm.
and it just pumps me up. And sometimes I'm like, all right, some of those days where I like have to just do things I don't want to do, I will listen to that. So The Game, Alex
The
Hormozy, there you
game.
go.
Have to check it out. Have to check it out. So, this one, this next question, is something I always ask, but it's kind of funny talking to you with a million people across the across the board. But where could people find and engage with you?
I would say LinkedIn's probably the platform I'm most engaged with when it comes to like responding to comments and things like that. But people could just go to my website as well, www.therealestrecruiter.com. Good way to get a hold of me.
And give me a mic drop moment. So something that wraps up, some piece of advice, whatever you want it to be.
All right. Get over yourself. Start creating content and start figuring out your point of view to add value in 2025.
Love it. Well, Joel, thank you so much. I really appreciate you hopping on. Of course, you and I could talk for hours, but I guess we'll put a pin in this one. So thanks again, man.
Thanks, Trent. Appreciate it, man.
All right. And that is a wrap on another episode of The Human Capitalist. Thank you so much for choosing to tune in and invest your time with me today. I hope that you walked away with some valuable insights and actionable strategies that you can maximize your greatest asset, and that's you. But hey, before you go, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so that way you can stay in the know. The human capitalist movement begins with you. If you have some feedback, feel free to leave it. I'll read every comment. I want to make sure that the content that I am delivering is what you want to hear. If you want to connect further, you can find me at my link down below. I'd love to hear from you and continue this awesome conversation. Well, this is Trent Cotton, your human capitalist, and I'm going to sign off. But remember, invest in yourself, own your potential, and keep building your human capital.